Back at it again. It's another edition of the State of Football, brought to you by the NFL Draft Bible. Special presentation, our second week here, talking current events, bringing you inside the hot topics of what the trickle-down effect of college football delaying, canceling seasons, NFL contingency plans. What does the NFL calendar look like? What are some of the hurdles that a underclassman faces versus a senior? How does eligibility and insurance play into these factors and roles moving forward? And a very interesting article that I just read on Sports Illustrated, training costs, agent fees, stipends. We've got an agent perspective, Justin Van Fulpen from Sport 5, formerly of LaGuardia, of course, with Power Agent Joel Siegel. He's going to bring us that perspective. We've got insurance provider perspective from Big Daddy Salgado, Coastal Advisors, Fox and Friends. He's going to talk about the importance of what that decision-making process looks like. John Murphy, of course, up there in Toronto with the Argonauts, is going to give us an NFL executive administrative side point of view. And, of course, inside the league, CEO Neil Stratton back for a second day here, and he is well connected with all avenues from the all-star games to the agents, the trainers. And fellas, I ask this question every day to start off the show. Our confidence now seems to be waning, and I'll start with some of our newer guests here, and I'll kick it off with you, Big Daddy. Welcome into the show. How confident are you? I've been saying, how confident are you in a college football season, but it sounds like now, how confident are you that the SEC and ACC will be able to have a college football season?
First and foremost, thanks for having me on, and I'm glad to be on with this astute group. But I don't know. I'll tell you, I go back and forth, and what I don't get or have a understanding of is you're not going to have students go to school. You're not going to have students go to games, but you're going to have athletes go to practice, go to meetings, and play games. I'm confused with the difference, and you know what I mean by you're going to have a mass. College football teams have 100 kids usually on a team or more, because it's not like an NFL team where you only have 53 or 55, and or with the taxi squad. So how do you do one but not the other? That's what's really got me confused.
Yes, money and greed, it sounds like, is the equation there. Justin, you are, probably having these conversations with players. I think it's a case-by-case conversation, and welcome into the show. I forgot to introduce myself, everybody. Rick Saratella, RIC, and a place to be here at the Jersey Shore. It's just been a can't stop, won't stop situation. It's 9 a.m. Eastern here, but it feels like 9 p.m. We get the day started early. Justin, the conversations you're having with players right now, is it a case-by-case? What does the decision-making process look like? And before you delve into that, do you have any confidence college football will be played in 2020?
Yeah, I think in terms of some will. I mean, I think the SEC, and the ACC right now are trying to push ahead. We see Nebraska coming out saying, hey, they want to do it, whether they go to playing outside the Big Ten or however that plays there. I think there's a standpoint of really people wanting to play college football, especially the SEC. And in down south, football is king there, especially college football. In terms of on a player standpoint, I think it is a case-by-case basis based on where you have for as your NFL thing, talent-wise. If you're right now graded by the NFL as a top 100 pick, I don't see those guys playing in the spring if it gets delayed. I think in terms of, lower tier guys, they've got to take it, just day by day to say, okay, where do I fit in the real talent level? Do I have the ability to play? Do I have the ability to transfer? And I think those are things when we're talking about MAC athletes, and especially Big Ten and what happens with that. And there's a 10:30 a.m. call for the Big Ten to make a decision with those presidents if they're going to play, delay, cancel, et cetera there.
Let's go over to Neil Stratton inside the league. Neil, we've often heard Nick Saban say, hey, if a guy's a first-round pick, guns blazing, go for the pastures, right? But now as Justin just said, if there's a guy that's a top 100 pick, chances are he's not going to play during the spring. But we've had conversations here throughout the past week that this will eventually trickle down to even the 7th round picks should the college football landscape shift to the spring. Very interesting article. I know you've had something on your Succeed in Football blog post in terms of stipends and combine training fees and pro day draft prep. I mean, the agents took a bath this past year. Some of them dropped $40,000, $50,000 on a guy, and they had no pro day to work out at. And now you're talking about going from an 8-week span of paying costs to a 7-month span. I mean, I'm talking to some agents that are just like, hey, I can't afford the tab this year.
Mm-hmm. Just yesterday, in one day, I had 2 agents who are subscribers say, hey, listen, I'm out. I don't know from a standpoint of the agent class, especially the guys that are more rank and file that are maybe newer. I think you're going to see a lot of agents get out of the business because they're not ready for these expenses that they're about to face. There's always been a disconnect, Rick, and you know this, between what players think they are warranted as far as the training and the housing and the stipends and what have you, and what they're warranted based on their draft profile and their actual draft status and what have you. And so that's going to be a difficult thing for a lot of players to grasp. And I think you're going to see a lot of players opt out. And I mean, I can understand why. And then find, oh my gosh, now what am I going to do? I thought some agent was going to sign me. I thought I was going to have a place to train. I thought this, and this. And that's to say nothing, Rick, of you're only looking about a 6 to 8 week cycle on how long you really can train and expect to see results. You can't train for 8 months and think you're going to get better. Even if I start training right now, I'm not going to get down to a 4.40. So these guys there's a limited window, and the way that the whole draft process was set up previously, it was kind of made to fit into that window. Right now, who knows? The combine could, if everything collapses, maybe they have the combine in November. We don't know. Maybe they move it later. Especially if they move the draft later. I mean, there are so many questions and so many variables that it's almost hard to project anything. But I'll say this, Rick. Here's my big take for today. If there's no fall football, I really don't think there's spring football either. And I think that players need to go into it thinking along those lines, because if we don't have a vaccine and chasing a vaccine can be a very difficult proposition, I don't know if there's any reason for these conferences that cancel now to play in the spring. And if there's no football at all for a full year, the implications on that are going to be difficult and far-ranging, and more than just athletic, quite frankly. I saw a stat yesterday. I heard a stat that at the Power 5 schools, 60% of academic scholarships are funded by the money they make with college football. That's a much bigger issue than just football. And I don't see it as greed, because think how many kids are benefiting from that. So, football pulls the plow in so many ways for these colleges these days. And you can argue about how maybe that's not the way the economics should be run. And you can argue about how it's taking advantage of these players and what have you. But the facts are that this is really, really far-ranging. It's going to have a major impact. And it's more simple than just, oh, you don't get to watch football on Saturday, so I feel so sorry for you. We should be saving lives. It's a difficult, complicated issue. And I hope that everyone's looking at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, and it seems like, the top players are declaring for the draft. The top FCS players are running to the transfer portal. And like to your point, Neil, hey, spring could roll around. We could be in the same exact situation, and there is no season.
Right.
But, back to the combine training, the draft prep process, John, Neil makes a good point. All these players, as you know, even the UDFAs think they're a top 100 guy. And now you saw in the Sports Illustrated article, hey, these trainers are prepared. We've seen trainers be just as aggressive like sharks chasing after these prospects. Barmarino's got a plan. Hey, it's $5,000 a month leading up to January. Then January we kick into full combine where it could be 30 to 40,000. And then, Tony Villani, same deal. He's got a laid out day by day chart, month by month, to ramp guys up now on a 7-month draft cycle. How crazy is this? How many agents are going to be out of business? As we stated yesterday, it's really 10 agencies controlling 90% of the NFL population.
Well, I think it would depend on how how do those different companies assume they can make their money? How many of them need, like right now, instant access to those funds? Or how many of them can almost start brokering their own deals to where normally a lot of those agencies have purchased a spot at a training facility and then filled in the blank when they get the necessary player to send to that trainer. If the trainers take control of that situation and almost cut out the middleman, which would be the agent, and go and just make their deals with the players and say that they're assuming as much of the risk, well, now you might be able to balance out some of this equation where it's not coming immediately out of the agent pocket. It's not immediately coming out of the player pocket. But if those trainers knew the amount of extra money they could make by training the number of guys they could train for 7 months, and they're going to get it all on the back end when these guys get paid in the NFL, there may be some balance, in the power. The other thing that's for sure going to happen is when there's such a major difference between the haves and the have-nots, right? And we've all seen those stories where all of a sudden, you're at the Senior Bowl and here comes some guy that no one's ever seen before, and one of these days it might be Justin, and the guy's got 10 guys, right? Like he's walking around like he hit the lottery at Vegas. We all know that there's going to be somebody in that marketplace who is shrewd enough to look through to the other side and say, hey, there's a post-COVID benefit to hitting a boomerang on all these kids that are falling out or going to be in this, surplus, because the things we mentioned about the spring and having further conversations yesterday throughout the day, the major thing that people are forgetting is Title IX is running this as much as anything else. And the second part that's going to run it is they're not building extra fields anytime soon. So at most universities, when you subtract, the major universities, but even in the MAC and some of the smaller conferences, come the springtime, that football field is also at various places. The football field, the field hockey field, lacrosse court, the soccer field, men's and women's sports, and other events that a lot of these colleges have to use those facilities for non-school events, which helped raise the money to build them in the first place. So if you now have to put all of those sports and all those events on the same schedule, and like we mentioned, Big Daddy said it, these college rosters are 80, 100 plus kids. But you start having early entry of your top prospects for the following year. Those kids are showing up on campus late November, early December, because like I mentioned, Derek Stingley was practicing with LSU leading into their bowl game 2 years ago. Those same kids start showing up on campus now this year to play in the spring. You're going to start having guys get pushed off the back end of that roster. And then what are you doing with all those kids who are not going into a transfer portal? They're being shoved into a transfer portal, or told to go elsewhere. Yeah, I think, it's the bottom line, and it'll sound funny, because it is, but the main reason we're still talking about playing college football is nobody's showing up on a Saturday afternoon at LSU to watch a kid do a chemistry experiment. They are showing up to watch college football, and that's why we're still saying if you can do it, hopefully we're saying it this way. If teams like Nebraska and Iowa, the ACC and the SEC are saying we can keep these 200 people safe if they're the only 200 people that are on campus, and the reason we're pushing forward to do it is what Neil said, if we don't, the University of Alabama could shut down. Their entire university is run by the money orchestrated by their football program. What they would look like as a university, not as a football program, but as a university minus 1 year of football money would be tragic, at best tragic. And I think that's why you're seeing these team presidents, they're so leery of that future lawsuit of a guy having heart issues or showing back up with something years down the road. But at the same exact time, they're worried about being the last team president at that university.
Great perspective here. Rick Serratello, NFLDraftBible.com, along with John Murphy, Vice President of Player Personnel for Toronto Argonauts, Justin Van Fulpen, an agent at Sport 5 Agency, Neil Stratton, CEO of InsideTheLeague.com, and Big Daddy Salgado, CEO at Coastal Advisors. Big Daddy, back over to you. Listening to our panel talk, you hear words like risk, you hear words like safety. We've spoken on previous shows about what a football calendar could look like if there is a spring league and these college players are playing in the spring. The draft happens. Now they're in the fall camp in the NFL. They could literally be playing football 10 months out of the calendar season. A lot of people are familiar with, they hear a lot of the first round picks, Lloyd's of London Insurance. Well, you're in that business with Coastal Advisors. Talk about the value, the insurance, and the decision-making process that players that are watching this right now could be hearing, and what that looks like from your perspective.
Well, right now it's a hot topic. And what I mean by that is if let's say college football was to not move forward at all, okay, you're going to have these kids that are in the top 100 that are probably going to say, I'm not going back to school because there's no reason to go to school because there's no football. So I'm going to go and hire an agent. I'm going to go and get my workout, all my workouts ready to go and get situated there. What's the most important thing before those two things? The insurance. Because if a guy goes and blows out an Achilles, a guy tears a hamstring, and most importantly, at this time right now, if a guy gets coronavirus, you are protected. If you lose your lung capacity, your breathing, you will be compensated in a tax-free manner. But where it comes back, and here's a real touchy situation. Justin, you may not appreciate this, but it's part of you being an agent. The guys that are the legit players are going to force the agents to pay that premium because the kids don't have the money. The kids, if you're in college, the way it works is you would go and get approved for a certain amount, and then there's a lending system that lends the athlete the money to pay the premium. It doesn't go to the athlete. It goes from the lending institution right to the insurance company. Then when the player either graduates, gets drafted and makes the team, or moves on with his life, he pays that loan back to the lending institution. So if there's no college football and a player decides to give up his eligibility and his amateur status and sign with an agent, the first thing I'm advising the player is get the insurance and get your agent to pay for it. If he wants you to be his client, he's going to pay for it because you got to make sure any injuries, COVID-19, all these things are factors that these athletes have to take into account. And a lot of guys don't because they think, I'm Tarzan, I don't break, I don't this, I'm that, I'm a quick healer. Well, COVID-19, I ask athletes all the time, explain that to me. What are you going to do? And I'm talking about NFL guys. That came up obviously last month, where all of a sudden I'm getting calls from guys left and right, and I actually wrote some policies.
And you talk about the COVID factor, Big Daddy. Just we're hearing like a player from the Marlins now has long-term effects, and we don't really know the full science of all that. Does that play into the factor and equation? And also, like, I know grades are a big thing with insurance policies, and the NFL teams don't have those accurate grades because they weren't allowed in the schools. So it's a little bit tougher to gauge that. How does that factor into the equation this year?
Well, what happens is everybody knows I've been in this business over 20-something years. So having the luxury of having some general managers as clients and also having the relationships that I have, all the way up from Roger Goodell all the way down to about 20 equipment managers in the NFL, I will find information. And a lot of times, what the Lloyd's of London or the insurance underwriters, the actuaries have, that information doesn't always click on what I'm getting. And when there's a guy that, let's say, oh, he's only worth this and he may be a fourth round pick, I'm like, no. And I've had these battles before where I'm like, this guy's going to be a first day kid. You're reading, and I'm not going to name anybody, you're reading so-and-so's thing on the internet. He's wrong. I'm getting it from the guys that are in the trenches every day and driving to campuses and going to high schools and interviewing everybody and the mother to find out about the player's attitude, his worth ethic, and also they're watching film from, the year before as well as, practices. What makes it difficult this year, obviously, no spring football, and if there's no season, these scouts and personnel people are really going to have to hump to try to get as close as an evaluation to a grade that the player may be projected at.
Yeah, it's a big dilemma in the business from the top down at the NFL level all the way down to the NFL Draft Bible level. All right. Rick Saratella, Big Daddy Salgado, Neil Stratton, John Murphy, Justin Van Fulpen. Neil, I want to go over to you with a topic that, it was interesting. Murphy, you got me laughing in the chat room, brother. It's interesting. I saw the comment floating around the Twitterverse yesterday. The media is chasing the wrong story. The real story here is that going back to the Kane Coulter 2013 case and the College Football Players Association, you saw the Pac-12 take a big stance and kind of get the wheels in motion here. Is the COVID-19 pandemic finally the tipping point where the college players realize, like, hey, we finally got the power here to create something, and this may be the biggest impact and legacy that this generation of players creates, far greater than anything they accomplish and achieve on the field. Why is this not being more of a priority? Not only I see the, we want to play hashtag, but why is this, coalition of a players association not being talked about more?
I think it's been talked about a little bit. You're right. I think it's gaining traction, but I think one reason I think that the players maybe have been able to kind of make all this click is because there's still not an understanding of how Title IX plays into all this. And again, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, somewhere along the line, the courts essentially said, listen, you've got to pay for this Title IX stuff. And the colleges said, well, football's our biggest pot of money. We've got to use football to fund Title IX. And I think that the disconnect is the players are thinking, well, listen, how are you making all this money? We're not getting any of it. And the pushback from the university is we've got to fund a lot of sports that don't have the number of fans and the TV deals and what have you that college football has. And so I think that you'll continue to see this gain traction, but I think the players, my estimation, need to have a little better understanding of what the full financial picture looks like rather than strictly, hey, we're making all this money, why aren't we seeing any of it? Again, it's neither here nor there whether or not you believe that's the right thing to do or not. The facts are there is a lot of money that's got to be spent on these Olympic sports and women's sports. And if there's no college football to fund that, those sports pretty much go away. And again, we had a court decision 20 or 30 years ago that said that you've got to do it this way. You've got to provide a platform for these athletes. So I guess my answer would be until there's a fuller understanding of exactly where this money goes and what it's used to fund and to support, I think the players are going to have a little bit of a hard time really getting from first base, which I think was where they all are right now, to second base and on all the way home.
Unless, Justin, the players push for their schools to now maybe create this super PAC that we've kind of heard rumblings about. And what if the P5, because they are the ones that generate all the revenue, mainly at the college football level. What if these 64 or 70 teams say, hey, you know what, NCAA, bye-bye, see you later. We're going to create our own super PAC, and it's going to be these 64 or 70 teams. And, oh, by the way, it's going to pave the path for a College Football Players Association. Is that something that you think could possibly be the outcome here?
Well, I think so. I think that could be, but I think in terms of the problem, though, is college athletes only have a certain amount of eligibility. Trevor Lawrence, as he's leading the push through social media and using his platform, in terms of he's gone next year, whether they play a season or they don't play a season, most likely he's the number 1 overall pick or a top 5 pick in next year's draft. So then who's going to then take that mantle? And I think that's where the universities have kind of an edge over the players in terms of that. Where in the NFL, we see in terms of Tom Brady's longevity, Drew Brees' longevity, Peyton Manning's longevity. These guys have been year after year, and they can fight for something. These college athletes, they turn over every, as far as the good ones, they're out in 3 years. Derek Stingley, like John was talking about, he won't be in the 2021 draft, but he'll be a first-round pick, a top 10 pick in the 2022 draft. So those guys also not only looking for the best of everybody, they've also got to look at what's the best for them individually.
John, any thoughts here? What do the college football players need to do to unionize? Do they need to get high-profile lawyers involved? Do they need to take a stance and say, hey, we are not going to play until we have what we want? I see the Pac-12, again, they're trying to ignite the fire, but it has to come from all parties.
I think one of the biggest things is that it's been the same old for so long that until people start seeing it or reading the tea leaves like it might be shifting really in that direction, a lot of what isn't covered in major media or will not get covered that way is because they're afraid of the blowback. The way that business is done currently, you're not going to disturb that business by giving them that platform unless you think sooner or later they may be controlling the platform, because you're not going to rock the boat. And one of the major reasons why they're not going to get traction unless somebody wants to break that model is because no one wants to be the person supporting the losing side. And if this is just a temporary thing where they grabbed the microphone or, they fumbled over and gave them the conch by accident and they're just going to hold on to it for 30 seconds, no one's going to cover that and then be held responsible at a later date, by the governing process that has overruled all of this forever. So until the players have made a mark to where instead of the school saying if they're going to play or not play, that these kids say, well, COVID or no COVID, we're not playing. So why don't you try playing a college football season without Trevor Lawrence and without those mainframe guys? Now maybe they get a seat at the table. But I would say that, they're still in the on deck circle. I don't even think, I don't even know if they've made it yet towards first base because they're there. But I'm not sure that anybody at the real levels of college football is taking this any more seriously than, a bunch of guys that have used social media and the current, outlook in the world in terms of things. They're being given a little more of a voice. They're not being shouted down, which is awesome, that the kids are able to kind of use that as in a positive way. So far they have. But the minute they start trying to dip into somebody's pockets, they will be shocked how quickly the real world will snap back at them and try to put them in their place.
NFL Draft Bible special presentation here, the state of football. Rick Saratella, big shout out to our guests yesterday. We had Ralph Ventry, the assistant commissioner over there at the NEC, giving us great perspective, along with Corey Yates from Recruiting Analytics. By the way, Thursday night, we have a free tech seminar showcasing the Recruiting Analytics. Fantastic technology. Have you seen these guys floating around on Twitter? It's really mind-blowing stuff. email me, RSVP, RIC@NFLDraftBible.com. We got a lot of responses. And tomorrow, we've got some familiar faces joining us. Ryan Roberts from NFL Draft Bible, David Turner from Maverick Sports. Of course, the dynamic duo from Friday Night Scout School will be back on the grind with us. And, I want to shift gears up a little bit, go back over to the NFL perspective. And Big Daddy, over to you. You hail from a football family. Of course, you have a brother, a coach in the NFL, another brother in the football industry. As you mentioned earlier, very well connected. I've picked these guys' brains already throughout the week about, we talked about the confidence of a college football season. We know the NFL season is going to go off. We've seen it. MLB, NHL, and NBA doing their thing in the bubble. MLB, more similar to the NFL. And we saw the Marlins have a big case. You look at the standings, like the Phillies played 6 games and the Yankees played 16 games. Like, how does that work out when an NFL season, if a pandemic or a outbreak occurs in the NFL, how do you see this situation playing out? Of course, everybody's just guessing here, but will we get through an entire season? Are you confident of that? And is a outbreak inevitable around teams and around the league?
Well, selfishly, I want the season to go through, obviously, because, we live for football. Football is America. America is football. So along those lines, for me, yes, I want it to happen. Do I believe it's going to happen for the whole season? I say no. I really find it hard that you could separate everybody, in meetings and practice facilities. But what happens when you start practicing and you start scrimmaging and then you start having games? You can't break those bodies up. I mean, you have 11 on offense, 11 on defense. One guy has it, it leads to another thing, another guy getting it. So that's the only part that I'm really leery of. How do you continue to go all those games, 16 of them, and the season still go on? And I've asked, doctors that I know, trainers that I know, and it's a big concern right now. Everyone's following, I talked to my brother Jimmy, who's up with the Bills, and everything is totally different. Everything. Whether it's getting food, whether it's the way you walk into the building, the way you walk out of the building. I mean, it is a different world right now in football compared to what guys are accustomed to. I mean, I would have already visited probably 10 training camps by now. And I haven't done any of that. And a lot of people don't have the access that I do. And I could still go, but it puts pressure on people to why is Big Daddy here? And why isn't Harry, Tom, and Larry not allowed in? So I'd rather avoid that situation. But I think those are the things that you have to really sit back and say to yourself, how are we going to get these games off and people not be infected? Because you're not going to get a guy like me. Listen, I'm 300 plus. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm sucking wind without the mask. Think about wearing a mask underneath the helmet. You're not going to get that. Guys are going to be like sucking wind forever. You can only do so much.
And, Neil, this is another good point that Big Daddy brings up. We've touched base on it briefly, just the access, whether you're a media member and looking for access to information or interviews, or you're a scout and you're looking for access. A lot of these Blesto scouts are young in the business. And then you have up and comers who are just, cutting their teeth versus a guy that's been in the business 20 years and might know the pro liaison for decades. Access has been taken for granted. And again, just from a simple thing of walking into the building where I just grab a coffee and go up to my office, you don't think twice about it. Now it's a 15-minute process, right? Because now you've got to get facial recognition. You've got to go through, you've got to get your temperature taken. There's no pouring your own coffee. Everything is sterilized. You got to put gloves on. By the time you get to your office from just walking in the building, now it's a 15, 20-minute process. But there's going to be a lot of pissed off media members. There's going to be a lot of pissed off scouts because people aren't getting back to them. And I have a feeling this COVID thing, whether there's a vaccine or not, this thing is not going to just immediately go away. It could linger for a year or two. The Spanish flu came and went for several years. I think the access part is something that might be more of a staple, and schools realizing like, hey, you know what? We don't need 50 media members in the press box on Saturdays. We don't need 24 scouts coming through the building every week. We can just coordinate a Zoom call. How much of this is here to stay, and how much of that is going to change?
Well, I'll tell you, Rick, it's a great question, and something that a lot of people in the industry are thinking about. Everyone on this call thinks about the business of the game and how people are going to get paid and how business is going to be transacted and what have you. Some of the fans that might be listening in maybe don't think about this as much, and maybe it's not as relevant to them, but it is going to have an impact. I've talked to a lot of scouts who've really kind of voiced their concerns about, is there a job for me in a year if it comes out that we can do almost all this stuff virtually, and I can get on a call with a pro liaison with 70 other scouts or whatever, and he can tell everyone everything they need to know then. At some point, I'm sure we'll start seeing filming of practices that everyone can access, and so you can see body types, and you don't have to go there as much. And maybe in a year, or 2 years or 5 years, the idea of sending scouts across the nation to log hundreds of thousands of miles is a crazy concept because so many things have changed. If that happens, we're going to see a lot fewer opportunities for scouts. I think that's kind of across the board on so many things. As the access becomes tougher for agents, that's going to be harder as well. As the bar is raised on how much they have to train a kid, or maybe how much they have to pay for insurance, as Big Daddy alluded to, or any other thing like that, that's going to lessen that pool as well. Again, maybe fewer coaches in the building lessens your chances of anyone getting sick. So maybe you cut back on your number of coaches. Maybe this is all going to be necessitated because we don't see fans in the stadiums this year, and there's not enough money to draw from anymore anyway. So this could mean a radical shift in the way the business is done. And again, given that all of us are part of that business, it's going to have effects on us all. At the end of the day, just like in any other business, our survival is going to be based on how well we can adapt to that, and we can make the changes that we need to do. All five of us are probably going to see things change as a result of what's going on right now. I'm hoping that those changes are for the better, but we don't know right now. I mean, the picture's still developing. So the next week or two is going to tell us a lot about how things go forward, and certainly the next 6 months are going to tell us a lot about how things go forward. So in some ways it's an exciting time, but in some ways it's a scary time as well.
No doubt.
I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you one thing that in regards to the so to speak business of sport here with football, the one thing I know is even it trickles all the way down to the equipment managers. And what I mean by that is, look at all the shoe companies. There by now, every rep has been through every team locker room, making sure their guys have the right shoes. The teams have enough shoes ordered, because obviously Nike is the league product supplier. Those guys, the Nike people, they're all had their hands tied because now you have to do everything like we're doing. Zoom, on the phone, go over a shoe with a guy, unless, that's one of those things where you put the guy's foot in, how does it feel, touchy-feely, all that fun stuff, to get the guy to like the shoe, and are we making you the right shoe, how many do we have to get, all those things, everything has been affected, that all comes into play.
No doubt about it. I mean, even the new helmets that are coming into the NFL, if you don't have contact practices, until the last 2 weeks, we don't even know how those are going to react. So we're breaking down all these in-depth topics, the business side, the administrative side, the media side. I want to spend our last final minutes to kind of talk to the players specifically and get some perspective here as we close down and squeeze in our Super Bowl picks. But, I want to start off with you, Justin, Sport 5 Management, giving that agent perspective. We get a lot of players, both draft eligible for 2021, but also guys that came out this past year in 2020. We've talked about 621 rookie tryouts, according to InsideTheLeague.com last year. There was 0 this year, about 100 fewer undrafted free agent signings. So from an agent perspective, maybe you have an undrafted free agent client. What is the message more specifically to those guys? And shout out to Marvin Jones, who's doing a great thing with our undrafted free agent database. Make sure you get a hold of him if you want to get linked up with that. But what is the message specifically, Justin, to those undrafted free agents who were shut out from an opportunity, but that opportunity could be right around the corner because we talk about the pandemic, the breakouts, all of a sudden teams are going to be scrambling for street free agents. So there could be opportunity. It's just not coming as soon as they would like it, right?
Yeah, and I think in terms of, like Neil had pointed out in his reporting there, in terms of, hey, we didn't have those rookie minicamp tryout guys. So I think what you've got to tell those guys is, hey, stay ready. We'll see how this thing plays out. And maybe it's a standpoint where they've got to also go to another pro day next year if they don't never get another opportunity, if we have pro days, et cetera, there. So I think you've got to stay fluid there, as well as guys who, have been in the league, who've been in the NFL, who, maybe are out now, who are looking for another opportunity. I think we will see with the pandemic, with, like you were talking about, the Marlins and different things like that, we'll see in terms of guys get it where they've got to go on the COVID list for 2 weeks, 10 days, where the scouts, the pro scouts, they're going to have to do their job to know who's on the street, who's ready, who can we bring in to be able to do that, to be able to fill those roles, to be able to still have that sense of going for the Super Bowl, going for the playoffs there, trying to win. So I think that emergency list becomes even greater there because of, hey, it's not just an ACL or a shoulder or different things like that. It could be as far as symptomatic, not even having symptoms, but there, or even a false positive like we saw with Matthew Stafford, where if it was game week, he got a false positive there, he wouldn't have played that next Sunday there, as far as getting there on that Friday. So I think that short list, and what I'm hearing in terms of, even when we're talking about those pro scouts, a lot of the college scouts, since we don't know what's going to happen, a lot of those college scouts that are area guys right now, they're focusing on for as those guys, those free agents that they wrote up a report on that aren't in the league right now, or as well as, the players who are street free agents who've maybe been in the league or been at a training camp and stuff like that, so they can have that true emergency list. So as an agent, you've got to continue to let your client know that, hey, there's potentially going to be an opportunity, and when it comes, you've got to be ready, and you've got to be willing to go in there right now. If you want to get a workout, you've got to still go through all the protocols. You've got to fly, have 3 negative COVID tests. You don't take them 3 back to back. So for a workout, which normally was a day trip, is basically a 5-day trip just to even get a tryout there. So you've got to also, educate your player on how that is going to happen and what other opportunities there could be down the road, like we see as far as with the XFL. Does The Rock bring that back in the spring, and what's those opportunities for those guys there?
No doubt about it. Let's go over to John Murphy, because, John, I know you're communicating with the NFL GMs on a regular basis, and then you being a CFL GM there in Canada at Toronto, I mean, you've got players under contract asking, hey, when are we going to play? But I probably get hit up half a dozen times a day by street free agents asking me about the CFL. What's the opportunity? What's it look like? Now, I know my response, but for the players tuning in straight from the horse's mouth, what is the realistic opportunities? What does a street free agent have to do to get on the radar? And what does it look like in terms of when he might have an opportunity to play both NFL or CFL?
Well, I think the biggest thing is going to be, what those guys have said, the adaptability to what's going on is going to be paramount now and moving forward, because we know change is now coming. There's not a shadow of a doubt that that's happening. It's just going to be a question of, are you rolling with it? Were you part of it when it started, or did you get run over by it? Because it's happening for sure. And one of the main reasons it's happening is what we've talked about all morning. The dollars and cents of this business is now definitely changed temporarily, potentially changed astronomically moving forward, which means if you have to put that much more money into testing to get the guy in for a workout, to do your job, to have your scouting department, it's coming from some other area. And I'll tell you, we all know the area it's not coming from is it's not coming from money earned, in terms of it's not going to come out of somebody's pocket. It's going to come out of some other area in the organizations. So I think you should prepare now to say, can you create down the road a way to literally Zoom work out a guy? Can you create the analytics to do your job in a very fundamentally different way, to say, I've already seen that guy live. I've done the body type before. I have enough information. Now what's going to become paramount is being able to make those right decisions without all the optics of what was there, in terms of, I got to trust that the guy that I liked is still the guy that I liked, and I can bring him in, not have to worry about testing him and having it around for 5 days, because we're playing a game in 5 days. I got to be able to bring that guy in, say, that's the guy I'm putting on the practice roster. That way he only has to clear the 2 COVID tests. At some other point down the road, hopefully sooner than later, I also believe that part of this is going to be, just like you follow up every week to make sure the guy's training and healthy, you're going to be following up daily with Justin, and God knows talking to him every day will, get you, that'll get your day going. But you're going to have to be in contact with people like Neil, like yourself, and trust that that guy is COVID free, symptom free. And I think that's going to become a tracker too, right? You want to track the analytics. We're talking about the stuff we're going to listen to Corey Yates talk about on Thursday. At some point, somebody's going to have an app or something similar inside all these sports organizations, to where the player who's a free agent can check in the morning. As soon as he gets up, goes over there, takes a temperature, it gets downloaded to the system, and you now know that free agent guy is COVID free, which means I could sign him on Monday after a game, play him on, Saturday or Sunday afterwards. So if you are a future CFL prospect or somebody looking at our league, it's now going to be, do they have a passport? Are you COVID free? Can I get you in the country, quickly? And how quick can I adapt those players to the field? Because you're going to be doing so much more of this on the fly and with the adaptability to literally say, we saw it, right? You were at some of those workouts. I think teams will be online doing virtual type pro days or virtual workouts a lot sooner than later, because the next big thing that will be affected is the cost of doing your job will become paramount if clubs, universities, and others start losing money. So it'll be paramount for us to do it as a club, for Justin to do it as an agent, for Big Daddy to do it from there. Because if you're restricting your travel because of the business restricting it, or yourself restricting it to make sure, well, the thing that doesn't change is all of our bottom lines are still the same. If they restrict my travel to do scouting and evaluation, I can't then walk back in and say a 6-win season is acceptable, because everybody's under that same guidelines, right? Neil's not going to come out next Friday and say, hey, sorry, because of COVID, I don't have enough information to do a report. No, that's not going to fly. He has to adapt and find a new way to get that same information and put that in there. And the same thing, right? Justin and Big Daddy, they're still going to have the same number of clients to come up with the same number of business. But I believe you're going to have to adapt your business immediately to say, what if this is the new normal? because we know how we would all handle it if it goes back the other way. But we've all seen there's some really interesting things that we've all learned about how to do our jobs and how to do this business, minus some of the things that we were doing before. And I think that's really going to be paramount moving forward in order to stay ahead of that curve. And like Neil said earlier, you want to make sure you do get your at bat. Don't get caught, standing there waiting. Don't take your called third strike with your bat on your shoulder. You want to make sure you're swinging, early and often in this type situation, or I'm afraid you'll get left behind.
Yeah, great perspective there, John Murphy, Vice President of Player Personnel up there in Toronto for the Argonauts. Over to Neil Stratton inside the league, parting shot, and then we'll get our Super Bowl picks in and wrap it up. Neil, you'll be joining us again tomorrow. We're excited about that. Anything here you want to follow up on? Anything you want to tease tomorrow? Of course, go to InsideTheLeague.com and check out Neil's blog, Succeed in Football, for all you football business, work in football, aspire to work in football. Free advice. Trust me. Take it. Thank me later. Neil.
The only thing I'll say for any college players who are watching this, or any parents that are watching this, prepare as if there will be no football in the spring. Make your decisions based on that. Don't hope that someone's going to ride in on a white horse and save everything in the spring, that there'll be an opportunity. To me, you've got to be preparing as if we will not see college football in 2020 or early 2021, not until the fall of next year. So don't think that, hey, I'm just going to ride this out and then hope for spring and then get evaluated and then maybe hope the draft gets pushed back. You've got to make decisions based on, if there's no football, how do I best enhance my chances to get to the NFL, presuming there's going to be a draft at the same time that there always has been. Don't hope for college football in spring, because I don't think it's a realistic possibility right now.
Good point. The next game you might see could be the All-Star Game circuit, if that holds up. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Neil Stratton at Inside the League. We thank him. Over to our special guest today, Big Daddy Salgado. Of course, you watch him on Fox and Friends in the morning. You see him all over social media. Coastal Advisors, Big Daddy. Before we get into your company, are we allowed to get a Super Bowl prediction, or is that a Fox exclusive deal?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I do save that for that time of the year, and I have to say I had about a 4-year window where I had a better chance of growing hair than the picks that I had. But last year I stepped up to the plate and I went with my heart, and I did take the Chiefs over San Francisco, and I picked. My prediction was right, and I didn't get grief this year. But I usually do save that for that one time a year. I'm not ready.
Right, fair enough. I got you. Well, hit all the listening audience at home, any players, agents that want to get in contact with you, learn more information about Coastal Advisors and all that great information.
Yeah, well, obviously, you do see me all over social media. I am on Twitter at Coastal Advisors. I'm at Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. You see all my video hits. Fortunately, I'm able to be on with you. And what I'll tell is, all these young college kids that are not going to play this year, get yourself insured. I'm not the only guy in the business, but I hope you call me. But you need to have some sort of protection so that you can go to sleep at night knowing that if something were to happen, I have protected myself against future loss. I have offices in Boca Raton, in Dallas. I've got great partners that we all work as a team. I have J.B. Brown, who I know you're familiar with, who I played with at the University of Maryland and now has come on board. And he played 12 years with the Dolphins. So he's another added team member to help explain to all these kids. All of us come from a world, and I mean everyone here on the show, we all have experience. We've all seen it. We've been there. We've done it. Us as a company, we're not trying to sell something like a dream or a possibility. We're just trying to make sure, as we say, that your house is in order. So that when you go on and you walk out of that house, you feel safe and protected.
Make sure you check them out. Coastal Advisors, of course.
LLC, you got to remember, Rick. There's another company out there, Coastal Advisors, and they have a lot of fun sending me all these notes that they're suing me and all this other stuff because I don't use the LLC. So, Coastal Advisors LLC is the most important part before you even get a hold of me, so you don't get confused. I don't know what the other company does, and I don't care. But I just know that I do get a lot of nice memos from them.
Have their lawyers call my lawyers, and we'll take care of it, Jersey style.
I go, you guys don't appreciate the free press I'm giving you.
Right, exactly. Well, we appreciate that, Big Daddy. And again, the one of the biggest disappointments from this COVID pandemic was the cancellation of the Big Daddy Youth Football Camp that you do each and every year. Great job, and we look forward to having that back hopefully in 2021. So, Justin Van Fulpen, again, Sport 5 Management, nextlevelfootball.com football blog, a lot of great information and intel there. Give the players at home some information, more how they can contact you, what you guys specialize in, anything else you got going on the blog, and a parting shot for the people.
Yeah, I think in terms of, I appreciate being on, number one, with all you guys there. Yeah, definitely as far as my blog, footballnextlevel.com, just to be able to give some information, because there's not a lot of information out there. Neil does a great job with, his blog and different things like that. But again, there's not a lot of information out there for parents, for kids, for, not only just the dream, but what's the reality in terms of that, in terms of the business of football. So I think in terms of, we hope that we see football in the fall, but I think what Neil said in terms of you've got to prepare for that, like it's not going to happen. You got to make those decisions as far as, and if it's whether it's, hey, we're going to try to go to the NFL, or, hey, I'm just going to punt and wait for the next fall football season. I think those are opportunities as well, because talking with a lot of college coaches, as far as if they don't play, like the MAC, I've talked to a lot of head coaches at the MAC, they don't play, they're going to get the year of eligibility back, which is important for guys who are that late round type prospects to, hey, they need more film. As John will, say, film is everything. It's 80% of the evaluation process there. So not only if you don't have that opportunity, or we have the opportunity to come back, make sure to take advantage of all your opportunities to get to the NFL. So Super Bowl prediction, I think in terms of, if you look at, the Kansas City Chiefs, they bring back a ton of guys there. I think that's going to be the consistency level of teams. The new head coaches, they haven't had an OTA, an offseason to prepare. So I think the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC would be kind of the favorite. And then I think if you look in the NFC, as far as another team that's been there together, would be the Saints, with Drew Brees, Michael Thomas leading that charge. So my Super Bowl prediction here on August 11th would be the Kansas City Chiefs versus the New Orleans Saints.
And the winner is?
The Kansas City Chiefs, back-to-back.
There you go, putting them on the spot. That's Justin Van Fulpen. Of course, go follow him at J Van Fulpen. And John, over to you. Parting shot, little tease for tomorrow. We've got Neil Stratton back. We've got David Turner and Ryan Roberts back in the mix. What's on the docket?
I was just surprised that Justin didn't go to his default Lions versus Bengals Super Bowl pick. So it's good to see that he's spent his COVID time wisely doing some research. I think the big thing is, now like turning the attention to see, the following week, we're actually going to get into a few more cuts by the NFL teams for everybody to get down to 80. So that'll be interesting. They'll get into finally actually practicing, so Tom Brady can stop, having backyard practices at midnight that no one's paying attention to. So I think it'll be interesting to see what goes on. Do we start seeing a trend of how the NFL teams plan to have the most safety for their guys? Because once we get into real practices, now we're getting closer to what's going to happen during the regular season, and how do they try to do what they want and accomplish both things? Do you kind of socially separate at practice where the starters are at one side of the field and everybody else is maybe, on the other side? Do you do a split practice scenario like what the NFL had been mentioning? The closer you get to the season or the regular season, will they decide that those normal real important training camp battles that happen week 2, 3, and 4 are far less important right now to your organization if you're a Super Bowl contender. And if you are the Bengals, no disrespect, but you're sitting there with Joe Burrow and you're trying to identify how your offensive line is going to set up, where the new receivers and new people are going to be, are you way more engaged with younger players if that's where your team is at, versus do you start seeing the teams with Drew Brees and Tom Brady, and Phillip Rivers? Could they even, I know the Saints have possibly even had discussions of indoor, outdoor, doing some things to really improve all of the safety aspects, of things. Because when we see guys walking out to practice and before they even are doing anything in collision type practices, they're being sprayed by, by things that they think might keep them safer. We know the level of security the NFL is willing to go to in order to try to get a season kicked off. So I think next week we'll finally get to actually see some resemblance of training camp, and it'll be interesting to see, also how the media gets to cover training camp once there is live bullets being fired at practices. Do we get to see that? Because we know how many of these training camps would have been exciting to watch and see. How much of it are they going to give back to the fans, or how much of it is going to be a lot in the dark like everything else?
Well, we're going to monitor all that, dive into some more hot topics tomorrow. Lord knows how many stories are going to come down the wire between now and the next 24 hours. So appreciate everybody's time here today. All my special guests, greatly appreciative. And we'll be back at it again tomorrow. So make sure you log on NFLDraftBible.com. Follow us on Twitter for the live stream. We're on YouTube, Periscope, and we can't stop. We won't stop. We don't even know how to stop, everybody. Join us all week long. We appreciate everybody.
Hey, John.